Hi everybody, this is Chapter 4 from October Sky by Homer Hickam, The Football Fathers. For the next week, the destruction of Mom's rose garden fence by my rocket dominated conversation in Colwood. Mr. McDuff came down from the mine to restore the fence and report it had been reduced to splinters. Maybe Elsie better get my mister to build her the next fence of steel, Miss McDuff said to a friend at the big store. Soon the ladies in the backyards were repeating that remark, fence by fence, from one end of the valley to the other. On the way to the tipple, in the man trips on the main lines, in the glob, the mix of rock coal dust that lay apart from the mine, and even the face of the miners were talking about the great blast. "You little sisters are idiots, morons," Buck Trant, the big ugly fullback, announced from his back porch of the morning school bus. He laughed at himself, thinking his observation was brilliant. The other players joined in. "Little idiot moron sisters." Buck added for a moment of concentration, "You sisters couldn't blow your noses without your mamas." Roy Lee, Sherman, and Odell bowed their heads in ignorant rage. "Not me." Buck Trant was too easy. Not only was he a dimwit, he was vulnerable. Then Sonny said back, "At least we know where our mamas are." I shot back. Buck's mother had run off with a vacuum cleaner salesman a few years before. Just as soon I'd said my mean thing, I regretted it. But it was too late. Outraged Buck jumped the fence, but when Jack stomped on the brakes, he went tumbling. We were halfway up Colwood Mountain. Without a word, Jack pulled the bus over off the road, turned in his seat, and pointed to me. "Out!" he ordered. He looked at Buck. "You too, Buck." "Me?" Buck whined. "What did I do? Sonny started it. He's always starting stuff. You know that." Jack didn't take the guff off anybody on his school bus, even big, overgrown football players. "Don't make me have to come and kick you out the door, son," he growled. Buck looked for support from the other football players, but even they had their heads down. He walked meekly down the aisle and got out, standing forlornly in the dark. I followed him, and we stood beside each other while Jack slammed the door shut. Before the bus was around the curve, Buck was after me. I threw down my books, ducked his bear hug, and scampered up the mountainside and disappeared into the woods. "I'm gonna murder you, you little four-eyed freak," he yelled at me. "You and what army?" I challenged him from deep within the thick of the Ramadan. Buck huffed around along the road, but he didn't come after me, probably because he was wearing blue suede shoes. He didn't want to get them dirty. After a while, the car came along, and Buck stuck his thumb out and climbed in. I came down and did the same. Hitching to Big Creek was just making up for time in first class. I avoided Buck all day long, which was not easy. His locker was right beside mine. Roy Lee and the other boys caught me at lunch. "We aren't going to build another rocket," Roy Lee said. "Fine," I replied. I was already mad at him and the others for not backing me up on the bus. "I'll build one by myself," I said with such certainty, it surprised me even. Whether or not I liked it, I was committed to do it. "Have at it," Roy Lee muttered, and he and Odell and Sherman walked away. I knew I'd really messed up. I needed their help. I had to build a rocket. I didn't have a clue where to start. That night, while I was puzzling over my algebra, Jim stuck his head in my room. "Hey, I just want you to know how really great it is to have a brother who's a complete moron." "Don't worry about it," I replied lamely. "Everybody's laughing at the family because of you." "Just go away," I growled. "I'm busy." "Doing what?" he chided, trying to decide what dress to wear. Jim ducked when I threw a pencil at him and then pulled my door shut. Unbidden, a little bubble of brotherly jealousy gurgled up inside me. Who cared what Jim thought about anything? He didn't even have to think. Dad would take care of everything for him. I was some kind of sister. Well, at least I didn't go around wearing pink shirts and peroxide curl in my hair. My first rocket has caused me to be embarrassed on the school bus, at school, and now in my own bedroom. There was more coming. The following Sunday, when I went to the big store to buy a bottle of pop, I ran afoul Pookie Suggs. Pookie Suggs' history was common knowledge in Colwood. His father had been crushed by a slate fall about a dozen years back on the section where Dad was the foreman. To stay in Colwood, Pookie had to quit the 6th grade and gone to work in the mine. And anybody who listened to Pookie was forever complaining about having to quit school and go to work, blaming it all on his dad for getting his daddy killed. He didn't get much sympathy. It had been his daddy's fault, after all. He had gone under the unsupported part of the roof to urinate and anyway. Pookie had already been in 6th grade for 5 years when he quit. Nobody in town thought much if he'd ever reached the 7th. Still, for as long as I could remember, I heard Pookie's name around the house. Dad telling Mom about Pookie had done something stupid, or that he caught him idling back in the glob again, and Mom telling Dad back he should just fire Pookie and get it done with. For some reason, Dad had never taken her up on it. Maybe he felt guilty about Pookie's father. I don't know. But he seemed to tolerate Pookie more than he did with other complainant idlers. That was hot. I avoided Pookie whenever I could, but I hadn't noticed him among the men gossiping at the big store steps. Well, looky what we got here. Homer's little rocket boy, he said nastily. Heard the damn thing blew up. Did your daddy help you build it? Men sitting on the steps turned and looked at me. They were all holding paper cups and chewing tobacco spit, or filled with chewing tobacco spit. You gonna build another one? Tom Taco, one of the single miners lived in the clubhouse, asked. Tom was friendly. Yes, I am, I said. Well, attaboy. The step group cruised. See it? All you can do is build a bomb, Pookie said. Well, it's a damn good bomb, Tom laughed. Pookie stood up and kicked away through the assembly. If he had hoped to leap on me, it didn't work. He shoved his helmet back on his head and leaned into me. His breath fumed mostly of alcohol. You Hickmans think you're so hot, but you ain't no better than me or nobody else in this town. Sonny didn't say no different, Pookie, Tom said. Why don't you go sleep it off before you get into trouble? That's a sign that they probably all knew he had a little bit of alcohol on him. Pookie turned, rocking unsteadily on his hard-toed boots, faced the angles with sharp-pointed nose and a triangular chin covering his stubble. Covered with stubble. Despite the easy vulnerability of Dr. Hale, the company dentist, his teeth were yellow and cracked. His voice was whiny, and it sounded like an untuned fiddle. We need to go on strike, I'm telling you. That bastard's Homer gonna work us all to death. I don't believe work's gonna kill you, Pook, Tom grinned. The other miners erupted with laughter. Y'all can go to hell, Pookie muttered. He probably meant to sound rough, but it came out sort of pitiful. I couldn't help but feel sorry for him. He gave me another dirty look. Your daddy killed my daddy, he said. I ain't never gonna forget that. Tom stood up and tugged Pookie away from me, turning him round and pointing him across the street. You better get on home, Pook. I took the opportunity to slip through the men and go inside the big store. I got a bottle of pop and leaned on the counter to drink it slowly, watching through the glass doors what was going on outside. Pookie and Tom looked like they were dancing. Pookie trying to come or come inside the big store, and Tom turned him back around. To my relief, Tom finally won, and Pookie straggled off. Soon afterward, all the men got up. Their gossiping was done. When the steps were clear, I ran outside and grabbed my bike and pedaled towards home. Near the Coalwood School, I went past a line of miners making their way to the tipple with big grins on their face. They all yelled, "Rocket Boy!" as I flashed by. What have I gotten myself into? I told too many people I was going to build another rocket, and now I had to. But how? Who or what was the blam secret that was to make rockets fly? The final regular season football game ended with the Big Creek winning over Tazewell High School, just across the Virginia border. Jim sent two quarterbacks to the sidelines on stretchers and intercepted a pass and ran it back for a touchdown. With that victory, the team won all its games. Then the State High School Athletic Association did exactly what it was going to do and ruled that Coach Grainer's boys were not eligible to play in the state championship game. Although it was no surprise, there was still an instant uproar all over the district. The football fathers were besieged with demands from the fans and the football team to do something. Jim asked Dad every night at supper for a week after the last game what he was going to do. Dad kept saying he was looking into it. Finally, one night at supper, he was going to see a lawyer in Welch. So, in other words, the Big Creek football team, the football team that Brother Jim played for, was really, really good. They were undefeated. But they went for an extra game and played a team that was not inside of Virginia, and it was illegal to play a team outside of the state. So the Athletic Association said, that cuts you out of all of the district, sectional, and state the game. So they weren't able to go and be state champions or even play in the game. Mom, putting down her fork, stared at Dad in disbelief. "Homer, I don't think that's wise." Dad shoveled a spoonful of beans and cornbread. "Elsie, I know what I'm going to do," he said monochromatically. He didn't even look at her. Mom settled deep into a frown. "No, you don't. The Charleston Mucky Mucks don't want us to play, and they're not going to let us play. No lawyer's going to change that. You're just asking for trouble." "Mom, Dad's got to do something," Jim begged. "We deserve to play." "I know you do, Jimmy," Mom replied softly. "But sometimes we just don't get our way even when we deserve it. That's true for everybody, even you. I know that amazes you, but that's just the way it is." Jim's face went dark. He shoved his chair back from the table. "I want to be excused."
Teachers, I'm sorry for the...
Dad held up his right hand to his face to shield it from Mom's reviving gaze. "Jim, it's okay," he said reassuringly. "I'm going to take care of it." "Homer," Mom said back in her warning tone. "Elsie," Dad said back with his "don't mess with me" attitude. Jim stood up. Somebody better do something," he wailed. I made my move. The football boys didn't even bother. Even my brother were so easy. "You could move to Charleston and play up there," I suggested vigorously. Jim turned on me, his fist balled up tightly. "You're dead, Sonny." "Jim, go to your room," Mom ordered. She waited until Jim stalked off and then gave a threatening look back in my direction before turning to Dad. "Homer, just let it go," she said. Dad rolled his head on his neck. I could hear it creak. Ducking his head in the mine all day probably didn't do it a lot of good. "This is not your affair, Elsie," he said. "Just stop and think. That's all I'm asking for," she replied back. "The football flavors. If you put the brains of every one of the football fathers in my coffee cup, it wouldn't fill up. You've got to think of all of them. We've made up our minds, Elsie. We're going to Welch. Mom knew the Bible pretty much by heart, and she was quite capable of using it on Dad like a club. And if the blind leadeth the blind, both shall fall into a ditch, she told him, making the argument he couldn't fight back because she was clearly on the side of the Lord. In other words, if a troublemaker is going to lead a bunch of troublemakers, they're all going to get into trouble. Thank you for your vote of confidence, Reverend Lanier. Then the black phone rang. Ever the convenient way to end a discussion at our house. Dad yelled at whoever was on the other end and headed for the door. Throwing on his coat and hat, he went. I had no doubt he was grateful for the interruption. He didn't come home until past midnight. Sometimes, when he did that, I wondered if he was sitting inside of his office, checking his watch until Mom went to bed. A week later, Mom had feared the football fathers had themselves a proud little suit. The champion game was only a week away, so it was necessary to press the court to act fast. 3 days after it was filed, the state judge in Bloomfield took one look at the case and threw it out on a technicality. There was no precedent, he wrote, for a private organization to sue an entire entity of the court. The champion game was held as scheduled in Charleston, and the season was officially over. Jim was so mad he locked himself in his room all day, except to come down to eat and watch television and talk to some girls on the home phone. I kept out of his way, retreating to my desk in the living room to read Dad's latest Newsweek. I'm glad it's all over, Mom said, watching Jim stomp morosely up and down the steps. We're going to appeal, Dad said from his easy chair. He was reading the paper. We're going to go over the judge's head. But the game's been played, Elsie fought back. It's the principle of the thing, Dad replied. Mom went to the living room and stood over him. What's the principle? It's high school football. Dad turned the page as if he had just finished an article. I noticed from my position that he had turned to the comic page that he never read. When Mom kept looking in at him, he finally said, his eyes still firmly planted on the funnies. This is a man's work, Elsie. Maybe so, Homer, Mom replied, but this woman is telling you you're leading to a disaster. We'll see, he said, stealing her praise. Winter came to West Virginia later that year. It was a splendid fall. The leaves kept their bright burnt colors well into November, and the sky turned a pretty blue and like a robin's egg. Just before Thanksgiving, the first of the cold fronts from Canada finally reached us, and the trees abruptly dropped their leaves, turning black and skeletal. Winter storm clouds scudded in, got snagged on our hills, and stayed. Everything that seemed to turn black and brown and gray after that. Coldwood had its route for beginning of winters, just as it did for every season. Mrs. Eleanor Marie Danzer, the wife of Mr. Dovey Danzer, the company store manager, started to plan the winter piano recital, an annual social event. The company's coal trucks made the routes of the houses stocking the Coldwood boxes. The Coldwood Women's Club built a float for Veterans Day Parade in Welch. In 1957, Jim and the other football boys wore Marine uniforms and pretended to be raising the flag on Iwo Jima. A lot of veterans were sobbing on the Welch streets as it went by. Just behind the Coldwood float, the Big Creek Marching Band, with me, profoundly played the snare drum of the 5 drummers in the line. Standing with my mom on the curb, Dad clapped and cheered the Coldwood float as it went past. His eyes were on Jim the whole time, again proving he didn't pay very much attention to Sonny. Before I got there, he turned to talk to somebody behind him and didn't even see me as I paraded past. "Attaboy, Sonny," I heard Mom call above the rat-a-tat-tat to my drum. The Union leader of Colwood was a man named Mr. John Bonet. Dubonnet.
What page are we on?
64. A classmate of my parents at Gary High School. During World War II, many Colwood miners, including my father, were exempt from service because they needed coal for war effort. Mr. Don Bonet could have probably also stayed in West Virginia, but instead joined the Army. While he was landing on Normandy, my dad was opening up a part of the mine, an incredibly rich veil of high coal, so called because it was so thick a man could stand straight up in the tunnel after the removal. By war's end, Colwood Mine was a lucrative little operation, envied across the county. That when the UMWA finally turned its attention to Mr. Carter's mine, the labor peace that Colwood had enjoyed for more than 50 years came to an abrupt end. When Mr. Carter resided in the Union's attempt to organize, the Union ordered a strike. In retaliation, Mr. Carter insinuated a lockout, closing the mine to everyone. There was some pushing and brawling around the temple, rumors of gunfire up the hollows. To calm things down, President Truman sent the United States Navy to reopen the mine. After 6 months of military operation in Colwood, Mr. Carter was forced to sign the contract with the Union, and soon afterward sold Colwood in disgust. The captain and my father stayed behind. So I want to explain that a little bit. Whenever the World War II was going on, a lot of the men were excused from service because they needed coal to run the machinery and run America. That also was power that was needed to make the weapons and stuff for war. So in other words, no coal, we couldn't have survived the war near as long. When the war was over, people were starting to unionize. That meant the workers of the different places had representation and leadership. So if the coal mine, yes, gave them a free house and a doctor and a dentist, well, maybe they were only paying them $2 an hour. With the union, with that protection, the men were able to say, nope, we're not going to work for $2 an hour. We can't live. We can't have kids. We can't have a life. So that means they were able to fight back and say, we want to start making $5 an hour. And with the union support, they were able to do that. But then, with no workers, meant no coal, meant no money for anybody. That's when the President Truman came in and sent the Army to start working. That forced the Navy, that forced the owner of the coal mine to say, all right, I'll sign it. That means he started paying more, had to give more protection and rights. That also meant he started making less money. That made him even more upset, so he just sold the mine and said, see you guys later. That's always a big deal. All right, let me read for a little bit longer. In the decade that followed, an edgy peace between the labor and the management settled over the town, broken only by intermittent strikes, usually quickly settled. The Colwood operation became even richer. When the captain retired, my father, at the captain's insistence, took over his position of the mine superintendent. Since he was only a high school graduate, many people in Colwood and the union and the steel company that owned us too thought my father was not qualified. Father set out to prove them wrong by sheer volume of work and application of every particle of his energy and intelligence. He also continued to carry the captain's vision of the town for long, after nearly everybody else had already forgotten it. By 1957, most of the union leaders had followed the captain into retirement, and a new crop of eager to show their worth to rank their file. Mrs. Dubonnet was one of them, Mr. Dubonnet was one of them, quickly rising to the lead of Colwood UMWA local. Although nobody noticed it until it was too late, having Mr. DuPont and my dad on opposing sides was a prescription for conflict. Mom had predicted one day in early winter, Dad stood outside the tipple and called out the names of the men to be cut off. The national recession was underway, steel orders were reduced, and Coalwood was producing more coal than the steel companies needed. 25 men were cut off from the company. The phase was apt. Not only were the men separated from their work, they were cut off from their homes, credit at the store companies, and identification as a Coalwood citizen. The miners cut off were required to leave their house within 2 weeks. Few of them surrendered, moved up past Snake Root, and built shacks along the fringe of the woods, hoping someday to be rehired. My father was later ordered by the steel company to bulldoze them out, but he never did. The church put together baskets of food at Thanksgiving and Christmas for these families. For the first time I can remember, I heard little children were showing up in Coalwood classrooms, needing clothing and food. After the cutoff, the local union, not certain what else to do about the threatening strike, Mr. DuBonnet showed up on our footsteps one evening, and Mom answered his knock. "Why, John, come on in. Come on in," she exclaimed, evidently pleased to see him. I was sprawled on the rug in the living room, reading The Voyage of the Space Beagle by A.E. Van Vogt. He had written a lot about rockets and his heroes were voyaging in, but nothing about how it worked. That was a disappointment. "Elsie," Mr. DuBonnet greeted her grimly, taking off his black helmet and staying on the porch. "Is Homer home?" Dad was in the kitchen getting an apple ready. After his cancer was cut out of him, the doctor prescribed him as many apples as he could stand, and he ate a lot of them. Dad came to the door. "You want to talk to me?" Dad came out the front. "DuBonnet, come see me at the office," he said, in a mean tone of voice that I never heard him use. "What's gotten into you, Homer?" Mom gasped. "Well, come on in, John." The union man stood his ground. "It's okay, Elsie. Homer, could you step outside? We need to talk before I go down to the union hall for a meeting." Dad frowned, but went out and closed the storm door behind him. I couldn't hear what was being said between him and Mr. DuBonnet. But I got up and came into the foyer so I could watch. Mom gave me disapproving looks, so I retreated back to the living room, carefully positioning myself to where I could still see what was going on. I remember that Mom and Dad said Mr. DuBonnet had all come out of Gary. I also recalled that Mr. DuBonnet had been valedictorian of their class and a football star. It had never exactly been said, but I think Mr. DuBonnet had taken my mom out a few times, way back. After a while, Dad opened the storm door to come back inside. "The company's given you a good job and a house and a decent life, DuBonnet," he was saying, "and all you want to do is tear it down." "The cutoff was not done properly according to our contract," Mr. DuBonnet said reasonably. "You know that, Homer." Dad put his hand on the doorknob. "The company did what it had to do. How they turned you into such a company, man, I'll never figure," Mr. DuBonnet said. This time his voice was hard and bitter. "Better than to throw in a bunch of John L. Lewis's commies," Dad shot back. Mr. DuBonnet shook his head. "The trouble with you, Homer, is that you don't know who your real friends are. When the company gets into trouble, it'll throw you out like a dead mouse." Dad stepped back to the porch. "And the trouble with you, Mr. DuBonnet, is you can't get over I got the captain's job." Dad was about to say more when a cough started to grab his chest. "That's it, Homer," DuBonnet chided him. "Cough your lungs out. You might be the mine superintendent, but you've got a common miner's disease." "Stop it, you two," Mom spat. "Stay out of this, Elsie." Dad grabbed a big strangled breath. "Look at him," Mr. Dubonnet said to my mother. "You think the company cares anything about his lungs or anybody else's? Hell no! This is what the great captain did with us with his continuous miners." Dad shook his head, searching for air. "You lay off the captain," he gasped. "He was a great man. I've got allergies, that's all. Look at my daddy. Look at yours, too." They worked in the mine all their life, and they never had any problems with their lungs. "Our daddies dug coal without pricks, Homer," Mr. Dubonnet said back, with being calm again. "The continuous miners grind the coal up, fill the air with dust, and we get the cutoff settled. It's the next thing I want to talk to you about. We need some way to protect the men from the dust." "I'll think you get off my porch," Dad choked. "John, maybe it would be best," Mom said softly, putting her hand on Dad's arm as he shrugged it off. Mr. Dubonnet put his helmet back on. "Elsie, you're a fine woman. I always thought you deserved better." He turned and went out the gate and walked across the street towards the gas station. Dad lurched back inside and slumped into the easy chair. "Damned Union, John L. Lewis, son of a bitch," he muttered. "Still thinks he's a great football player. Well, I could have played, but I had work, picking coal at the tipple after school." "I know, Homer," Mom said, watching him from the foyer. Her gentle tone surprised me. Dad's hands were trembling as he reached for his paper. "You're a good woman, Elsie," he said. "I know that too, Homer," she replied softly. "You could have had your pick." "I did." She looked at me, probably just noticing I was in the living room. "Go to your room," she barked. "Study." I nodded and went up the stairs 2 steps at a time. Outside, a line of cars rumbled into the gas station, and I looked out the window to see what's going on. Mr. Dubonnet got into one of the cars, and then they all headed down Main Street. I guess they were headed to the Union Town Hall. Just before Thanksgiving, Doc Lassiter ordered Dad to get an x-ray. Then he refused. Doc went to Mr. Van Dyke, the only man in town who could tell Dad what to do. Mr. Van Dyke was the mine's general superintendent, a company man with silver hair who had been sent by the steel company to keep watch on its holdings. Dad was a company man through and through, had no choice but to comply with Mr. Van Dyke's orders. He went over to Stevens' clinic in Welch and then came home. I was upstairs in my room reading a spot. I heard him tell Mom it's about the size of a dime. Oh, Homer, for goodness sakes," I heard her say in a small, worried voice I had never heard her use before. "What are we going to do?" "We're not going to do anything," Dad replied blandly. "Why you're looking at me like that? Don't worry about it." Or, "Why are you looking at me like that? Don't worry about it. I'm only telling you because you'll find out anyway. The only way to keep a secret in this town is if I tore down every backyard fence in it." Dad went to the living room and sat down and snapped open the Welch Daily News. Mom looked up and saw me. She scowled, crossed her arms, and went back to the kitchen. She was soon rattling pots and pans. I went back to my room and stared at nothing, feeling a little panicky. I had been around Colwood long enough to know miners with spots on their lungs were supposed to quit the mine. It was not unusual to see them sitting in the big store or the post office steps during the day, quietly hacking out black spits. For some reason, it was their lungs that made them quit. They were allowed to stay in Colwood as long as they could afford rent for their little houses. But I never imagined the common disease of a mine could affect my dad. He seemed far too tough for that. He had a spot on his lung the size of a dime. I'd have to ask someone about how bad that was. Maybe Roy Lee. His older brother worked around the face where coal dust was the thickest. Yes, I would ask Roy Lee. He would know. In December 1957, the United States made its first attempt to put a satellite into orbit. It was the Vanguard. I saw the results on television. Vanguard managed 3 tentative feet off the pad, lost thrust, and blew up. According to the paper, the whole country was shocked and disappointed. I was too. I read some newspaper editorials and listened to the television commentary that wondered if perhaps Western civilization itself might soon be at an end with technology superior Russians were taking over. I might have worried more about Vanguard's failure if I hadn't had the rocket problems of my own. Vanguard, after all, had managed to fly higher than mine had. There were a lot of smart people working on the project, and I guessed they'd figure things out sooner or later. I, on the other hand, was all alone. That's why I decided, like it or not, to talk to Quentin. All right, that's the end of chapter 4.